A custody dispute in a Ritzy part of Connecticut nearly turns deadly. A woman accused of trying to kill her estranged husband by slipping poison into his wine when he wasn't home. And you won't believe what she allegedly said when police confronted her about her alleged plot. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Imagine going to a wedding and learning that one day the two people who you're watching exchange vows would be involved in this story. One accused of trying to kill the other by slipping antifreeze into their wine. But that is what this woman is accused of doing. Her name is Kristen Hogan. She's 33 years old and she lives in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Now, Ridgefield, it's in Fairfield County. This is not a cheap place to live. According to Zillow, the community of 7,100 people has a median property value close to $1 million. So if you are thinking old money, Stepford Wives, Connecticut, this is the kind of place that we're talking about. But the truth is, money can't buy you happiness. And that is what Connecticut State Police are laying out in this story. And you won't believe what Hogan told authorities when she was confronted with evidence in this case. We'll get to that in just a moment, but let's go back to the beginning and how this story started. It's August, and there's a man that shows up at a hospital in Connecticut with what at first doctors thought was a stroke. His mom found him slurring his words, he was staggering, he was vomiting, and when he got to the hospital, doctors realized that it actually wasn't a stroke, but he might have been poisoned, specifically by ethylene glycol. It's a key ingredient in antifreeze, and it can be lethal if someone consumes it. And according to police, eventually test results came back and there were traces of this chemical in his body. Now, at first, police actually had him talk to a therapist to see if he had any sort of mental health trouble where he would actually take this ingredient himself. But then, when they realized he didn't have mental health issues, according to police, they talked to him about who might possibly want to poison you. And his answer went straight to his estranged wife, Kristen Hogan. Here's her profile on LinkedIn. Now, we found that she also worked for a nonprofit in Connecticut between 2014 and 2022, and here are pictures of her on the organization's Facebook page. Hogan and her estranged husband allegedly separated in May of 2025. They do share a child together who court documents called Juvenile 1. A family member of Hogan's shared these pictures of Hogan with the baby for a christening back in 2020. Right now, Hogan and her estranged husband are in this bitter custody dispute. Police say that the man has another child identified as Juvenile 2 in court documents who he shares with someone else. Now, this dispute is so bad that Hogan says in court documents that her estranged husband allegedly had her car towed from her possession because it was in his name. She also moved in with her parents, yet documents do say she had free access to the home that it appears that she once lived in with her estranged husband. But if Hogan wanted to hurt her alleged victim in this story, how would she do it? Well, this is what her estranged husband told authorities. He says on August 5th, he had family members over to his house for dinner, and there's a guest that brought a bottle of wine. They didn't finish the wine, so it was corked and put back in the fridge. Then, a couple days later, August 7th, Hogan's estranged husband says that he had to go to court in Danbury, Connecticut in response to a complaint that was filed by Hogan in their dispute, but she never showed up. Now, while he was at court, he says that he got an alert from his Wi-Fi router that Hogan's phone was in his house. When he got back to the house, Hogan wasn't there. But again, it has been written in court documents that she had free access to this home. Then a couple days later, on the 10th of August, the man says that he allegedly uncorked that wine and he had a little bit. He went to bed and woke up the next morning around 6 o'clock and he was vomiting. He was sick. He had to go to the hospital. The man told police that Hogan, as a motive for allegedly poisoning him, if he was dead, she would get full custody of their child and she would get full ownership of the house. Now, Connecticut State Police tested the wine bottle and it came back positive for traces of that antifreeze ingredient. And then, allegedly, that wasn't the only thing in the house that had poison in it. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But as this story was investigating and Connecticut State Police were waiting for results to come back on the the wine bottle testing, and they're trying to piece together exactly what was going on. On September 29th, the estranged husband calls police to tell them that the child that he shares with Hogan was in the hospital. That child was allegedly showing similar symptoms of what he had dealt with in August. Hogan allegedly told social workers that her estranged husband could be poisoning their child. So based on those allegations, the estranged husband was removed by hospital security. Now, the man said that being accused by Hogan was odd because recently they had been treating each other better, he said. He said that Hogan had seemed more cordial with him. She was bringing over their child more to the house. She would even offer to cook him dinner, which he did find odd. We're going to take a moment and pause from this episode of On the Case to bring you a Law and Crime legal alert. There are allegations claiming that the online apps DraftKings and FanDuel are engineered for addiction. Now, these multi-billion-dollar companies allegedly continue to put profit over safety. Every free bet, every boosted parlay, and every small payout triggers a dopamine rush that creates dependency and turns harmless fun into a detrimental habit. They keep you hooked, chasing impossible wins, and trap you in a cycle that can lead to significant financial loss and ultimately damage mental health. Our legal sponsors are taking on the online gambling industry to potentially get compensation for all those impacted. So if you or a loved one has suffered addiction, financial hardship, or mental health issues due to sports betting apps, visit gamblinglawsuit.com/OTC to take a short quiz and check your eligibility to file a claim. Now, police decided it was time to interview Kristen Hogan to get her side of the story. Now, she told them that she believed that her estranged husband was poisoning their child. She also said that she was now living with the man full time, and that is not true from his side of the story. But again, she had full access to the house. Now, Hogan told police that she didn't go to court that day related to the complaint that she filed because she was actually with her family in Rhode Island. Remember, that was the day that her phone was allegedly inside the house because of the Wi-Fi router. Then police start laying out some of the evidence they've collected, including her search history. It's stunning. Hogan allegedly searched potassium cyanide, potassium ferricide, citrate cyanide, and potassium thiocyanate and monoethylene glycol. That last one was the chemical that her estranged husband allegedly tested positive for. Now, on top of that, she allegedly searched how much of those substances, quote, would kill you and where you could buy those substances. Then she searched several measurements like kilograms to pounds. She wasn't done also searching. She searched, quote, penalty for not appearing for court hearing on your own motion. And this was all a day before Hogan didn't appear at that court hearing that her estranged husband was at. So at this point, it appears that there's some pretty strong evidence against this woman. And when confronted about her search history, she didn't come clean, allegedly, not yet. She allegedly said that she didn't know what police were talking about, and then she said she only recognized the word cyanide from the TV show Psych. You might remember that. It ran from 2006 to 2014. Here's a picture of the cast at Comic-Con. Now, Hogan then, quote, remembered she did buy monoethylene glycol. It was back in July, and she bought it on Amazon because she needed it to clean a carpet at her mom's house. Police then lay out even more of the evidence that they have allegedly against her in this case, because they said, based off Wi-Fi information, they knew that she was inside her estranged husband's house, and they told her that the reason he went to the hospital and he was sick was because he tested positive for the same chemical that she said she ordered to clean her mom's carpet. Then it appears, according to court records, that Hogan allegedly came clean to an extent because she told police that she never intended to kill her estranged husband, but, quote, wanted to make him sick as payback for him being mentally abusive. Hogan then allegedly said that she didn't measure how much she put into the wine bottle. When asked if she put the alleged poison anywhere else in the house, she said she did in an iced tea bottle. She claims there's no way that her child or the other child, juvenile 2, could have consumed the tea. She claimed that her search of how much the chemical would kill you came after she learned her estranged husband was in the hospital, not before. Perhaps that can be a key piece of evidence in this case. Now, Hogan was arrested, and she is now facing a charge of attempted murder. She's also facing a charge of interfering with an officer, and she is being held on a $1 million bond. Joining us now to talk more about this case is criminal defense attorney Eric Faddis. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. This case is so interesting because there seems to be a good amount of evidence based off the search history and some of the scientific findings of testing of the victim and the wine bottle, and then they have a conversation with her where it seems that she admits to something. Even without that conversation, how strong of a case would prosecutors have?
Well, Chris, looking at these charges, there are two attempted murder charges, so you got to prove an intent to kill. What we have, according to the police, is evidence that Kristen Hogan was doing these web searches for poisons. How much of this poison can kill you? She was out, not at the court date when she was supposed to, when they believed that this poisoning may have taken place. And there's indications from her digital download that her phone may have been in the vicinity of the house where the poison was placed into the wine. So certainly some substantial evidence against her. And then you have the interview with police on top of that.
Yeah, let's talk about that interview, because in the beginning, it seems like she was playing it like she had no idea what they were talking about. And we do see in a lot of these police interviews where they already know the answer to the questions, and then they just start coming with more information one after another. And then eventually at the end, she says, okay, allegedly, I just didn't mean to kill him. In an attempted murder case, how does that argument typically go?
Yeah, it matters. In terms of the interview itself, what happens is the police acquire incriminating information before they do the interview. They know more than you when they're doing this interview. They ask her where she was on the day that the poison got in the wine. She says she's in Rhode Island. Her phone indicates no, she was at the house where the wine was poisoned. When it comes to her alleged confession, the prosecution has to prove an intent to kill here. Her statement was that she only wanted to harm him to make him sick because she was mad at him. That could present a hurdle for the prosecution in determining and establishing that she had that intention to kill her ex-husband based off that statement.
Well, because if she's charged with attempted murder, and it seems that she admitted to some extent that she did take this very dangerous chemical and put it into a wine bottle when he wasn't home, if she's found, like, they don't find that intent to kill, if this ends up going to trial, like, could she get in trouble at all, or do you just walk scot-free because you weren't charged with whatever, I don't know what the charge would be, but for at least trying to get him sick?
Even if the prosecution cannot prove an intent to kill for the attempted murder charge, her conduct was still likely criminal based on the reports. What they could look at is an intent to cause serious bodily injury. Also a very serious charge. It's a felony in nearly every state. And so even if there was no intent to kill, an intent to poison someone to make them super sick likely constitutes that intent to cause serious bodily injury, and so there would be a lesser offense of which she could potentially be guilty.
So would that be something where, because I know right now they arrest her on the attempted murder charge, where as the investigation continues and whatever legal back and forth happens, that she would face another charge on top of that?
Potentially, the prosecution starts out with their initial charges, but in most states they can add charges oftentimes all the way up until the day of trial. And so this investigation's ongoing. We could see more that comes out. That being said, at trial, they could do what's called the lesser included offense and just assert it at that time, which will sort of put the defense on their heels even more.
In the court documents, just going through kind of the arresting documents, this appears like it was a very bitter custody dispute, I know they're estranged, but the separation in May, to the point where he, because the car's in his name, he gets the car, towed from her house or wherever she was living. So it appeared this was not going well. And she also says that he was mentally abusive. As a criminal defense attorney, how do you build that story up to try to help your client when we know prosecutors are going to say, she put the stuff in the wine, he got sick and he could have died? And it seems like the domestic violence, not domestic violence, but at least the domestic dispute part of this is, would you say that that's going to be her strongest argument at this point?
It's an important part of her story. And part of a defense attorney's job is to tell their client's story. That's the part that hasn't been emphasized in public reports. And so, as defense counsel, you want to make clear to the prosecutor and to the jury that there was a lot more going on here, that there was this custody battle, that there was this alleged mistreatment from the alleged victim to the defendant, Kristen Hogan. And then that sort of fills out the entire story of what's going on here. That being said, it could be a problem for defense because it presents a motive. It gives her a reason why she would want to harm her ex-husband. So it's a sort of a double-edged sword that you got to treat delicately.
And I know that, at least in the interview that she gave to police and what it says in court documents, that she said she had no idea like how much of the, she seemed like she was really trying to play dumb. But then the search history comes up and she was looking up some pretty specific, very serious chemicals. And like for me, what stood out was she was looking at measurements, I think it was like kilograms to pounds or whatever it may be. How, I guess, strong could that be against the argument of like, I just thought like I saw it on the show Psych and I was going to do this. And, it seems like the search history could be very troubling.
I think there are two ways that search history can be interpreted. One, from the prosecution, they're going to say, hey, look, she was investigating the specific amounts of poison that can be required to kill somebody. In fact, there's a search how much of this substance can kill somebody or something to that effect. And so it shows that she was calculated, that she had a conscious objective to bring about the outcome she wanted, which was death. If you're the defense, you can look at that and say, hey, perhaps she was researching how much to kill somebody because she wanted to give a lesser amount. Her conscious objective the entire time was simply to harm him and not kill him, which is consistent with the statement she gave to police. So I think there are multiple interpretations though.
What's it like as a criminal defense attorney? Because I'm sure whoever's representing her would have rather not had her talk to police and say the statements that she made. But when you're in a situation where you're trying to defend someone who it's kind of the toothpaste is already out of the tube, how do you handle that, but then try to build up a case for your client?
From defense's side, you have to look at whether there's any plausible innocent explanation for the incriminating evidence that the police appear to have. So you look at this interview where Hogan essentially halfway admits to poisoning or admits to putting the poison in the wine. But I think, false confessions can happen. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but I'm saying it's something the defense needs to explore. On top of that, there were some suggestions that perhaps the alleged victim had some contact with the poison and was poisoning the juvenile. I'm not sure how credible that evidence is, but there are such suggestions in the reports. And so there are multiple avenues as a defense counsel that you have to go down to try and determine, hey, what exactly happened and what are the best points that I can put forward on behalf of my client.
I feel like in a lot of these cases too, I know you and I have talked about Barry Morphew out in Colorado a little bit, and you just wonder, he's been accused of killing his wife, and, a big kind of, smoking gun of that could be the chemical that he allegedly used to kill his wife, and he was the only person that possibly could have had a private citizen in that county in Colorado. Who knows if he's guilty of that, like whether he was even thinking of that at the time. In this case, I feel like the Wi-Fi, I didn't even know that a Wi-Fi router could send an alert that someone was in your home like this. As a criminal defense attorney, how would you push back on, do you just at this point accept that yes, she was in the house?
Well, the digital footprint is important to scrutinize with a fine-tooth comb. Sometimes what a digital download might appear to show might not actually be the reality. We're talking about investigating who has access to different IP addresses, who has access to different devices. How can a search history from one device give us conclusive evidence about who was doing the search? That there are all of these questions that remain the defense needs to investigate, especially this early on. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that someone stole her phone and did this, but I'm saying that they've got to get that digital download established in a conclusive fashion in order to present it against her as evidence at the trial.
How do you go about, you look at this case and all the pieces of evidence, and ahead of a trial, if they try to get certain pieces of evidence thrown out, and let's say they get the Wi-Fi thrown out of it, does that eliminate almost her even being in the house? And then you can build a whole defense that a jury had never heard of this story before, but it seems like that would kind of be the root of everything that places her at the scene. I guess, how do you get that piece of information out if there are questions about whether or not that was actually her phone?
Oh, well, there are certain requirements in the rules of evidence. And so as defense counsel, you're looking at, hey, can the prosecution establish that this digital analysis was authentic, that it is actually tied to my client and not to somebody else, not to a neighbor, not to an intruder? There are a number of alternative plausible explanations that need to be ruled out. And so there are ways to use the rules of evidence to show, hey, this digital download is not competent enough. It is not conclusory enough and authentic enough to go to a jury. These are arguments her counsel might make once we get into the motions practice phase of the case.
And just going back to the intent part of it, if she sticks with, I didn't mean to, kill him, and that's her part of the story. If the motive is that she would have gotten the house, full custody of the child, I guess what's the bar of intent if you have a suspect and a defendant saying that this is not what they intended to do?
Well, so the prosecution, and that's really difficult. As a former prosecutor, I had to prove what was inside the mind of these defendants at the time that they committed acts in the past. No one has that kind of crystal ball. It's not something that you can just transport the jury into the mind of the defendant. So you have to use corroborating consistent evidence that supports your notion of this intent to kill. And you look at it, the poison was something that's toxic. It's something that kills people. If she wanted to harm him, there are alternative ways that she could have tried to do that short of some poison that could kill him. And so there are these arguments you have to make even in spite of the statements that Hogan made to police that she only meant to harm him, while her actions show otherwise, is how the prosecution is going to play it.
And when it comes to, I think if this was a case where she was trying to harm him, allegedly, I'm more generally speaking, if you shoot somebody, there's clearly an intent, and then there can be some literally smoking gun that can tie someone to it. What are some of the challenges with the poisoning case? Because it does seem like we've been covering a lot of these recently, especially in some of these disputes that have been ongoing.
Oh, sure. There are a number of hurdles that arise. One, where did the poison come from? Can you actually trace it back to Hogan? People say a lot of things in police interviews when they're nervous. Sometimes they misstate things. They don't recall things accurately. On top of that, you've got to determine when the poison got into the substance that was ingested and how and by whom. And so the police are trying to build that up. They're using the digital download, but it's still going to be difficult to rule out. You want to look at, did this alleged victim have any other enemies? Did they have any people who were out to get them? My understanding is that there were people of means. And so that can give rise to the specter of some other party's involvement for their own interests. And so these things arise in poisoning cases, and it's really about ratcheting down these specific facts, being able to show the jury, this is where the poison came from, this is how it got into the wine, and this is who put it there, and here's why we believe that.
And then just lastly, she's being held on $1 million bond. Don't believe she has an extensive criminal history, but a poisoning it's concerning when someone's accused of that. What would be the argument if you were her defense attorney of whether or not she would be granted bond if there is a bond hearing?
In terms of bond, what the judge is looking at, really two primary factors. One is whether she is likely to make it to her court dates. The second is whether she is a danger to the community. And you argue, hey, look, in terms of her past behavior throughout her 30-some plus years of life, she has had a very limited criminal history, if any. She hasn't caused any harm to anybody else. Things might have been precarious during this custody battle, but there are ways to control for that. You can order her into treatment. You can order that she wear a GPS monitor. You can order that she be monitored for her own substance use, these sorts of things, to control for possible risks of a danger to the community. So there are arguments that can be made for her to be let out on bond, but I'm sure the judge had concerns that if she's out, she could harm herself or others or try to skedaddle.
Yeah, we'll see how this story plays out. A shocking case as far as the allegations, but we have yet to really hear her side of the story, so we'll see what plays out. Eric Faddis, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with me.
It's great to be with you, Chris.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.